stay at Marriott's and College Inns and things like that. But the other side is I can't keep this up because my glass is fogging. I can't see anything. So it's a bigger hole in the head than I usually have. Go over there. But welcome to yet another session. Congratulations, you've all made it for yet another day. Not for to sleep completely. What we're going to talk about is with the Washington theme of getting past gridlock and how to navigate the school issue, because we all have them. And it doesn't matter whether it's a rheumatic disease or ADHD or whatever. These are problems all of us face, and all of us face at different times throughout our child's lives. And we've got to be able to try to come up with a way to make it work for everybody and to make things better. Because, quite frankly, all the things I've ever been through in my life. And so I'm a pediatrician who takes care of kids with rheumatic diseases and other chronic illnesses. I've had 3 kids who have had different disabilities. My wife has one. The most stressful events I've been through have been dealing with the school system. And if it happens to me, it happens to lots of folks. And so part of my vengeance on my school system is teaching you all how to be better. And then I am. So the whole point of this is how do we go from this kind of a situation to this where it's better but not optimal, to ideally something like this or even better this. And so why am I giving this talk? This is the second of my 4 children, Neil, who has Down syndrome. He's taught me one heck of a lot over the years. And so as a result of that, I've gotten very interested and passionate about school issues and those kinds of things that relate to people with disabilities. Because of problems not with him, but with one of the other kids, that's why we're here to wreak vengeance on all of our school systems. Just to give you an idea, Neil, as of September, will be living in his group home for 4 years. He's 26 now, and has had a job that his group got replaced by a machine and should be starting another one very soon. But he's got a life. And the reality is, what do we want for our kids? Out of my house, off my payroll. Right? That's our goal. And the goal's no different for him than it was for any of the other kids. And so he's been successful. And actually, for a while, he was making more money than a third of the family. So that was great. But the thing we're going to talk about, and I'm going to run through this stuff fairly quickly, unfortunately, because there's a lot of things here. But some of the overarching issues, and CYSHCN is an acronym for Children and Youth with Special Healthcare Needs. And part of the issues is it involves all of these different aspects. There's legal issues, you have multiple systems you have to deal with. Collaboration and coordination is the bane of all of our existences because we're the ones who do it. You have decision-making criteria that change for everybody, different supports. We have different expectations. Society has different expectations, what resources there are, and then the individual differences among everybody. And don't worry about taking notes with this, okay, because we're going to have all these slides that are going to go on the web, and anybody who wants me to email it to them, I'll do PDF handouts and send them to you later, so no sweat. But this is really the issue, and this issue was raised by Fred Garner, who's a pediatrician in Northern Virginia, who also has children with some disabilities, and this really encapsulates it. And part of the thing is these interactions with school systems are frustrating for everybody, and it's not just the parents. School system people have frustrations too because there are many things they want to do that they are either not allowed or don't have the resources for everybody. And to me, one of the issues is why does it have to be so hard? And why does it always seem, still have hair, that all of our interactions, you get different stories, you get different answers depending on who you talk to for different years. You're not respected or treated as an equal member of the team. You're not getting what you think your child needs, or it's always a battle and reinventing things. And so it always sort of seems it's like this.
I'm surrounded by idiots.
Or this.
I'm surrounded by morons!
And so our goal is to change this from the unsuspecting parent to at least a suspecting parent. So part of the deal with this is context is everything. And really what I hope to accomplish is to give you a sense of the backgrounds and the context around these interactions so that you can better address them from your perspective and for your child's needs, and understand where they're coming from as well, so that, because it really is going to be a negotiated settlement, whether you like it or not. That's the way it's going to be, it is that you don't want to end up living as a divorced couple in the same house, because it's just really way too stressful and uncomfortable. So what we're going to go through is some of the legal underpinnings about special educational services, some of the similarities in the laws between educational activities and with vocational services, and how the worlds don't mesh very well. And that's what I've learned over the years, I think, is one of the biggest deals, is that the same words mean different things to educators, to doctors, to parents, and lawyers and everybody else. So I'm really sorry, but this is all about law, and they determine eligibility, and they have timelines for implementation and everything else. And that's just what it is. So if you want to play the game, you got to know the rules. And if you want to get in, you got to buy a ticket, like last night. So people may, schools say, oh, we don't want your child labeled, we can just do this, we can do that. I'm sorry, your child's already labeled. You can't watch the game if you don't buy a ticket. You got to go through these dances to get the services. And that's the way it is. So these are the primary laws that are involved with this. And IDEA, or Individuals with Disabilities Education Act, and then they made the Improvement Act in 2004, which many of us take issue with, is the main special ed law that everybody thinks about. But there are other ones that apply. And one is Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. And you're going to hear people talk about 504 plans all the time. That's the shorthand for this. Americans with Disabilities Act applies. No Child Left Behind Act is creating great consternation among educators and educational schools and boards and everybody else. FERPA, which is an acronym you'll hear a lot, is Privacy Act, and then Social Security Act is actually involved too, but we're not going to touch on that very much. But the thing to understand about this is that the legislative intent of each of these laws is different. 504 and ADA are about civil rights issues. IDEA is to meet the educational needs and protect the rights of children and parents. No Child Left Behind is to improve educational outcomes for all children, not just children with disabilities. And then FERPA is about privacy protection. So start with No Child Left Behind, and it's still a work in progress, and people are not sure what to do with it to this day. What people were trying to do and are trying to do is to mold all of these goals and accommodations that you would have for students who need additional or special services into the same goals that you would have for all students. And this has really become a driving force, and as a result, schools are changing how they do things because this is what they're being graded on. And as all of you know, in any job, whatever you get graded on is what you're going to focus on and make your priorities. And so, you know, we used to have terms that folks used for people with cognitive disabilities in their own schools about, you know, sort of, you know, the trainer mentally retarded or the educator mentally retarded. And the high-stakes testing that is being rolled out as a result of all this, in my humble opinion, is turning our system from educating kids to training them to do these tests so that the schools can look better. And I guess I should pause and just give you a couple disclaimers. My youngest child's 22, got bad ADHD, so a little cynical and sarcastic, and the government in my speech center ain't so good all the time. So if we start going off on tangents and it's getting really bad, then, you know, somebody bring me back on task. But the most important thing about No Child Left Behind right now is that it's up for reauthorization. And so there's all sorts of lobbying and things being done by educators to eliminate a lot of what they consider to be unfunded band-aids and things they got to do under this law. Again, it's a fascinating situation that they didn't lobby like this about the unfunded mandates that go with IDEA. That's been around since 1975 and says that the federal government is supposed to pay 40% of the costs, extra costs for special educational services, and regardless of administration, has not made it up to 20% yet. Which is why your local school districts are very upset about these things, because it's got to come from local money. This is the history of IDEA. It started off in 1975 as law PL 94-142. In 1986, they added EI for early intervention and services because this was an educational law. It starts at age 2 or 3. That's a state option about which age you start at, and it's run by the educational system. Early intervention actually was a state choice about which agency runs it. So in Virginia, it's under mental health services and mental retardation services. Because they had different imperatives. In 1990, they combined these two laws into IDEA. It was again reauthorized in 2004. They published the regulations a couple years later, and 2009 and later, people finally got around to doing state regulations. These are some acronyms. If you haven't heard them already, you just need to know as we move through. One is FAPE, for free and appropriate public education. All children in the United States are entitled to free and appropriate public education in the least restrictive environment. An IEP is an individualized education program. This is a written document that is created by a team with the parents and spells out what the issues are with the child and what the goals and objectives and ways we're going to address those. Part B of IDEA is the traditional educational services. This was 142. Part C is early intervention. So when they combine them, you now have these two parts of a single law, which has created some interesting conflicts and changes. Now, parents and students are to be equal partners in all decisions, that eligibility services are going to be based on the child's educational progress, independent of their medical issues. And this is really an important thing that most doctors and parents don't understand, is that having the diagnosis doesn't get you services. This is a functional issue. Is the diagnosis, is the disability, is this problem interfering with making appropriate educational progress? And it's how does it affect their school? And so, again, the word appropriate is such an interesting word because it doesn't equal best. And you're going to hear school districts say all the time, well, we're only obligated to give you a Chevy, we're not obligated to give you a Cadillac. It's one of their favorite lines. You know, that's the reality. So I look at this as very much like building codes. You know, building codes are the minimum standard the builder has to meet to have things approved. Good builders don't need building codes. Good teachers don't need IEPs or anything else like that. They're just going to take care of it because they're good. So this is the bottom. which is an interesting thing when you start looking at all your school districts' websites, right? You talk about their mission, philosophy, about having all children reach their potential and so on. And, well, it's interesting, except for one of the largest identified groups in your school district. And I had a dad once who, more cynical than me, and you're at a meeting with an assistant administrator for his district, and he came to introduce himself as an administrator for exceptional education. And he said, "Oh, so you're here to help make sure that all kids get educated except my child." And it was a great start to the meeting. Getting back on task. One thing to understand about getting PT and OT and other services that people don't always realize is that these are related services and they're designed to help the student make educational progress. This is not a medical construct. This is not to make things better. This is not to improve function. This is to help you do better at school. And so it's only designed that way. So if the arthritis is not affecting writing or your hands to the point that it's interfering with your schoolwork, you're not eligible for OT services. If you get between classes one way or another, and it's not interfering with grades, you're not eligible for PT. That's just the way the law is written, okay? And it's so that you can achieve satisfactory progress. So it's not designed not to remediate or correct problems. Now, that doesn't mean you can't have supports or accommodations to do what needs to be done, but in terms of getting services, this is one of the differences. So to get this whole thing started, it has to be done in writing. Okay? One of the things to remember is, this is law. If it ain't written, done now. You can go in, you can ask for things that's really sweet. If it ain't written, it doesn't occur. And so to be eligible, you have to have the presence of a disabling condition as defined in the law, and it has to have an adverse effect on a child's educational progress. And these are the various categories that exist under the law. For most kids with arthritis or rheumatic diseases, you could probably fit under orthopedic or other health impaired, or some folks fit under multiple disabilities. You can shoehorn whatever box you want, depending on how you feel that day and things like that. But in the end, while it says you have to fit these boxes, the reality is, how does the function work? How is it affecting the school? So an IEP drives all the services, and as I said, it ain't written, it ain't going to happen. Unfortunately, even if it is written, it may not happen. And as you go through all these processes, you get past the, how well do I get this thing written, to how well is it being implemented, and start working on that. And so most of the things I'm going to talk about as we go through, I've learned over the years through hard knocks, and I always say that wisdom comes from experience, and experience comes from mistakes. So I'm really wise in this. So this is the process that you go through. You have to make a request. There's a meeting that's held, an eligibility meeting, to see if this is a reasonable request. It's supposed to be held within 10 administrative days of the request. Administrative day is the day that school's in session. So if you make it on the last day of school in June, whenever your school year ends, they got until 9 days the next year to do it. If it's determined that's an appropriate request, there's an evaluation that's performed. They have 60 administrative days to perform that. It will be a multidisciplinary evaluation, and you may say, well, why do I need a psychologist or social worker and all those other people to meet with me? This is a legacy from when this started. Prior to 94-142, schools were under no obligation to educate students with disabilities, appropriately or inappropriately. So, they say, oh, okay, yeah, your child's having problems, speech problems, do a speech about it. Well, maybe it's speech problems from CP. If they didn't do anything else, they were under no obligation to do that. So, as a result, the law said every child is going to have a multidisciplinary evaluation so that we can make sure we find any and all potential issues that would interfere with this child's educational progress. Once the evaluations are done, then you have another meeting to determine if this, if you're eligible. And if yes, then you develop an IEP and then it becomes implemented. And ideally, this should be based on measurable goals and objectives, and it needs to be provided in the least restrictive environment. And just to sort of, because it's supposed to be done collectively, by the whole team by consensus, and that includes parents and the student if appropriate, and everyone, can agree. So one of the things about least restrictive environment, there's a continuum of this, and it doesn't necessarily mean it's full inclusion, but the least restrictive environment for any child is a neighborhood school with age-appropriate peers and a regular classroom. And anything that is not that becomes more restrictive. And so there's this continuum. You can be in a regular class, with an aide or collaborative teacher. You could have pullouts for certain things. You can spend some time in self-contained classes, or residential school, whatever. But it's supposed to be in the least restrictive environment that you can have this done. And it also needs to, every IEP has to include a transition plan, because the goal of the schools and the goal of the parents are out of my house, right? We have to make plans to get there. And so you need to consider this movement, and you need to think about it in many different domains. It's not just the academics, it's not just getting a job or going to college, it's also, can you live? Do you need to learn skills to be able to, live by yourself, or be able to use transport, or anything else like that? And so all those things are eligible to be factored in. And it's supposed to be coordinated, it's supposed to be results-oriented, and it's supposed to facilitate this movement out of the school, and it includes post-school, any post-school activities, as well as based on your child's interests and preferences and what, is their strengths and weaknesses. And it can include any and all of these different options. So you can pull in multiple other agencies or organizations as appropriate to help as part of this to get these things done. So some of the issues to remember, again, educational system is failure driven, right? You have to not make appropriate educational progress. And if you think about, American, educational system, basically what we have is Henry Ford's assembly line overlaid on an agrarian calendar. So you come in as raw material at age 5 or 6. You've got a lockstep series of things along the line that you go with quality control checks along the way. If you're, don't pass the quality control check, you get sort of out and try to get fixed back on the line. If you can't, then you go on a different line. And you're supposed to come out with a finished product at 17, 18 or so. So it's only when things don't go well that these sorts of things kick in. And again, they're only required to provide what's considered appropriate services. And the other thing is it varies not just between states, but also within states, within districts, between different schools. A lot of it depends on that school's culture, and also depends on the principal and the people's attitude in that school, and how accepting they are or not of things. Is it a Lake Wobegon school where all the kids are above average, and we don't admit that anybody else is there, or not? And one of the things, again, to think about is how many people remember about medieval political systems? Okay. That's about average. Think about it. The dukes basically helped decide on the king, and he served at their pleasure. Dukes served the baron's pleasure, the baron served the sheriff's pleasure. But you had the sheriffs would say, oh no, the baron made me do it. No, I'm sorry, the duke made me do it. No, the king made me do it. Oh no, it's the local control. You guys decide about these things. So in a sense, there's plausible deniability up and down the line as people want to go through this. And you need to understand what the imperatives are on each part of the system. Each school, they're getting graded, and they want to make sure they do very well. And each district's getting graded, each state's getting graded. And so on. And so knowing those things are important to understand what limits the people you're with may have, as well as where the leverage points are. So again, a couple caveats. It really is what people think about, but for most kids with rheumatic diseases, quite frankly, an IEP or IDA is not necessarily appropriate because they're doing okay in school. And again, what we're talking about are services. We're not talking about a place. Most of us grew up thinking about special education as being that room down there. These are the services. This is the way your child is taught, what the child needs to learn. I mean, there are no, in effect, learning disabilities because everybody can learn, right? It's just teaching disabilities. We haven't figured out the right way to teach that child. And so you need to think about it in terms of services, not places. And the services determine the place, not all of us grew up, going through, allegedly regular ed, and you have a pathway of different classes that you went to in different courses and programs. And, that's how we think, oh, there's this class, and my child will fit best into this class. And that's how schools think as well. The reality is the law says it's supposed to be the opposite, that you decide what the child needs, and then you decide the best place to implement that. Part of the problem, and it's a reality, is schools have thousands of kids like your child. And they've got to figure out how do we best serve the most children in the most efficient way, which is what we all want to do. But we have to make sure that things are done appropriately for our child at the same time. And therein lies some of the conflicts and the frustrations and the other issues. So if you can't get eligibility under IDA, well, you can appeal it, and there are appeals abilities every step of the way through, or you can seek eligibility under another law. One of my favorite quotes of all time comes from Ralph Waldo Emerson, and it says that every wall's a door. So you can't go one way, you go another way. So we're going to move on to Section 504. And it's a civil rights legislation. Most of it also is within ADA. It requires that all agencies that receive federal funding will provide equal access to people who have disabilities. And it requires educational agencies to ensure that you have equal access to curriculum and services and everything else. And so what we're talking about, again, is civil rights and access for anyone who has a disability. So it's a separate law. You can be found eligible under both 504 and IDEA. However, most schools will argue that within an IEP, they have parts in there that have supports and accommodations your child may need. For instance, a high lock or 2 sets of books or things like that. Those are the kinds of things you can get under a 504 plan, and they should be rolled into an IEP. There's, depending on how tweaky you feel at the meeting, you can really push on it and say, well, I really want both just because. And technically it's legal, but that depends on how much entertainment you're having that day or need. So your child will qualify if they've got a physical or mental impairment that affects the child's functioning, or if the child is treated as if they have one. So if you have a school that is already saying, oh, we're just a the school, we're making all these accommodations, we'll take care of all this stuff, and don't worry about it, we're just handling this. Technically, they just determine that your child is eligible for 504. And it's something that actually most school personnel do not realize. Again, eligibility is determined the same way as an IEP by team decision. It usually requires a medical report, but it is not necessary. These are, again, functional issues. Typically, what will happen when you're going through all the process described for an IEP is they may say, well, Johnny's not eligible under IDEA, but he is eligible under 504, and so we are then going to go on and develop a 504 plan. And and the third alternative is eligible for neither. So what it says is that whatever accommodations, supports, and modifications your child needs to be implemented to allow them equal access to the curriculum and services within school. And that these can include all sorts of things, from behavioral to physical to organizational things, educational things. You need extra time for tests, you need separate rooms? Do you need someone, to be a scribe for you or whatever? Social. Do you need to have assistants to participate in after-school activities and all the other aspects of things that are going on in school? And vocational. And so you can start thinking widely about how to do that. And this is my personal opinion. I look at 504 plans as a disaster plan. Personally, I just think that everybody who has rheumatic disease should have a 504 plan, no matter how well they're doing or not doing, because you want to say it's possible that my child is going to have a flare next week, next year. I hate emergencies personally. The only good emergencies are planned emergencies. And so there's no reason to do crisis interventions if that's something that you could have thought through and anticipated and taken care of and had something in place to roll out at whatever point you may need it. And so I get a little prickly about that, just because, it says if something's, predictable, it's potentially preventable. And there's no reason to not do this. And schools say, oh yeah, but we don't need to take care of this. I said, so how many fire drills do you do? How many fires do you have? Same thing. So, as I said, it doesn't matter to me what they're doing at one time. I think everybody should have it. And the other reason is that this applies to standardized testing, to college, lots of other situations, field trips, whatever. Things that I was talking to my mother last night, and got a phone call the night before a field trip saying, oh, your daughter can't go because you don't have a wheelchair, and, it's been too much walking, and so we want her to stay home from the field trip. Which, oh, by the way, one of my great lines is always, I know you didn't mean to violate a federal law, but you just did. And, school worked it out the next day, not optimally, but it was something that was predictable and could have been taken care of before rather than the night before. And so I think that, we need to try to get them to start thinking in those terms. ADA is a civil rights legislation, expands on the Rehabilitation Act, and it applies to everybody. The Rehabilitation Act of 73 applies to organizations that receive federal funding. And this goes beyond just access to education, whatever. It's accessibility testing and all sorts of other things. And unfortunately, there are also multiple exemptions for schools. Much to my embarrassment, Neil, my son with Down syndrome, broke his leg one year. And he was in a wheelchair for 8 weeks. And the only interesting things about having somebody with special needs like that is he had no problem with the wheelchair. He'd been around people with wheelchairs his whole life. So he just said, okay, that's what I do. And so what it meant was that, the holes in the walls went from up here to down there, where he was sitting with the, with the wheelchair. But one day I had to take him for an orthopedic appointment and follow him, got back to school and discovered there's no power door in the schools. And the school is built after ADA. And so I got a little miffed and peeved. And turned out that there is an exception for schools. You do not have to have one within ADA. Very interesting. Again, ADA typically has more application for workplaces, but I think the other thing to remember, it applies to you as parents. If you have a child with disability, it doesn't apply to you, but it doesn't mean that you get special treatment. It means you have to get the same treatment as everybody else, and it's going to get more difficult due to some recent Supreme Court decisions, probably, but it doesn't. It means the employer can't do something to you specifically because of your child or what's going on with that. Doesn't mean you have to get special health coverage or that. You have to get the same as everybody. So you have to have, again, comparable benefits and services, how things are, policies are implemented as well. You have to have reasonable accommodations, and reasonable, again, is one of those words like appropriate. So, to some extent, you can look at it and say, all this is have computers. that's an accommodation to do my work. Having a computer that can, I can either talk to or talk to me, not unreasonable. So I think that those are some of the things. And similar to, least restrictive environment, you have maximum integration as well. FERPA is, again, the Privacy Act, just as much like the HIPAA law that you sign, when you ever go to any doctor saying, you're not going to share information with your permission and other medical team members. And it's an important thing. So I told you that story, so I can tell you this story. Because you need to have some of this background to be able to understand some of the things and be able to really be more effective and less frustrated moving forward. So why does gridlock occur? Well, again, parents and doctors have different languages than educational, vocational folks. Different operating assumptions, have different levels of responsibility and accountability. We have different definitions of success or failure. Schools say, well, if you're passing, that counts as making educational progress. Yeah, maybe. Not if you're making straight A's the year before. We all have different imperatives and different people who are leaning on us from all sorts of different directions. And we all have different time frames in terms of how we think about things and how fast or how slow things may need to be done. And I think, again, this is one of the issues, and it's a bigger and bigger deal for our kids now because we've got better treatments and you can look at people and not know that they have arthritis or not having a bad day or things like that. And just because you can't see it doesn't mean it isn't there. And by the way, this website, the Nth Degree, it's really cool. This guy is paraplegic in a wheelchair, and so he's got T-shirts and pins and posters and all sorts of other things you can get. They're all disability related. My personal favorite is a T-shirt that says, "I have attention deficit. Hey, what's that? How does it work? Can I play with it?" it's wonderful. He's got a lot of other cool stuff too. So anyway, some other reasons why gridlock occurs. If you look at this definition, ADA in Section 504 says you're disabled if you have a physical or mental impairment or treated as if you have one that severely limits one or more major life activities. And that includes all of these things. Okay? Now, on the other hand, IDEA defines disability only as it refer to education and handicapping conditions. And how does it interfere with education? And again, special education is instruction designed to meet those needs based on the disability. So you already have a difference between, if you say my child has a disability, which definition, which law. So that's one of the things. And so these definitions are not going to be the same. Related services under IDEA, as mentioned, can only be done if it's going to help improve educational outcomes. And again, just to confuse, Part C, early intervention, PTOT, speech, all those things are considered essential services under Part C. So when you're, in Virginia, it's at age 3, you go from Part C to Part B. 2 years, 320 days, you could be getting, 10 hours a week of PTOT, speech, and other things. And at 3 years, 2 days, you only get half an hour because now you're in Part B. And it's a related service at this point. And so, again, this is one of it's reality as a result of combining laws. The other thing is that 504 and 88 doesn't mean that you're going to get a program of services. This is protect against discrimination and allow access. And so you have differences that can exist in all of these areas. You have different procedural safeguards. So part of the reason for going through all this is saying, well, a lot of times you end up talking like this. If you're not sure of the language they're using and which situation you're applying it, so you need to figure out which one works best for your child. And we want to make sure that our meetings are not like this. That all of us are stupid and one of us. Another great website, despair.com. This guy's got all these motivational posters. He's got demotivators. So he's got apathy, procrastination, and all sorts of other. You can get them on mugs. You can get them all sorts of stuff. So I have things like this in my office to help keep me sane. So let's look at where you can intervene, because I mean really that's what we're getting down to, saying, okay, so here's the landscape. Where are some areas that we can do something about all of this? And one of the ways to think about this is to go through these kinds of questions and think about what is absolutely necessary. What's vital, and you know, we're all going to fall on our sword over this. What's medically or otherwise mandatory. You know, if a child needs to get their medicines with food at lunch at such time, that's got to get it, period. What are things that are going to be helpful and useful but are not necessarily vital? The things that you really want, but, you know, we can only need them sometimes or something like that. What can be done to help, you know, help the school help your student? You know, do we need to have people come in and teach the class, teach the teachers, provide them with, you know, with more information or resources, or can we, you know, help get some other folks involved from other agencies? What's the school's responsibility about these things under law? And the family and the student also, we all have responsibilities about this. I mean, this is a collaborative effort. What other agencies, whether it's rehabilitative services or mental health or whomever, and who can do what with whom? Who plays well in the same sandbox, because that's not always something that works. And any of these areas, as they apply to your child, are fair game to discuss and try to work with. So, accessibility. Can you get into the building? Can you get out of the building? For example, there's a story I heard once about Minnesota. There was a big snowstorm. You know, as a kid that was overnight, and as kids were getting off the buses, you know, their custodians were shoveling the stairs, and the girl in a wheelchair came up and said, you know, could you do the ramp? And I said, well, doing the stairs, the students can get in. And she went, oh yeah, if you do the ramp, everybody can get in. And so they went over and did the ramp. You know, there's things like that. But it can be, you know, for instance, again, do you need elevator keys? You know, or, you know, something like that, to be able to access mobility within school. And not just can you walk, but do you, you know, cafeteria, you know, can you carry a tray and walk? You know, or other things like that. What things in the environment, you know, for children who have Raynaud's phenomenon, which is where blood vessels will constrict down, not that you basically lose blood flow to your fingers or toes in cold environments. You know, we have to make very sure they're not sitting under an air conditioning vent. You know, and they can wear gloves or get dressed, you know, however they need to stay warm. I mean, I've had schools actually buy space heaters for some of the kids as well. To need to think about that. Seating and ergonomics is actually just more and more, I think, a bigger deal about trying to get everybody in better positions to prevent problems and things. Because, you know, think about it. I mean, our society now, we spend a lot of time like this. You know, because we're reading, we're doing our computers, we're texting, we're writing, whatever. And, you know, we need to have time an extension to set it up. If you're sitting in front of a computer, you need to have it here. You need to have the keyboard at a level that your arms are not going to get tired and not going to get overuse problems as a result of things like that as well. For children who, you know, get stiff if they're sitting for a while, we need to be allowed to get up and move around. You know, and if you need extra time between classes, you're going to need that as well. Do you need assistive devices or adaptive equipment? I mean, you know, there's, you always think about wheelchairs or crutches or things like that, but there's a host of other input devices or things that you know, may be helpful. And medication, talk about, do you have to adjust the curriculum? Do you have to, you know, I'll do things, for instance, about someone who needs regular physical therapy, try to get that kind of as a physical education requirement. And they still have to take their health classes, but their therapist is going to sign on and say, yep, they were there and they did their things, and they, you know, they should have met all the things they need to do for that class. Do you need, you know, 2 sets of books? Do you need a scribe? Do you need to get notes so that you don't have to tire yourself out writing things? Do you need extra time for tests or for homework? Again, do you need to adjust physical activities? Do you need extra rest periods during the day? Are there any supplies or special clothing children need? And again, because these are things that you may want to intervene at. It doesn't necessarily mean the school's going to provide them, but I think these are things that need to be talked about and need to be discussed for children who, for instance, have conditions where the sunlight may give them more problems. You need to make sure that they are going to get sunblock on before they go outside and it's reapplied. And if you're going on field trips, the people know about that and they have their hats and all sorts of other things like that. You know, that's medically necessary. Attendance, as you all know, is just a big bugaboo, and you might as well put in there that my child's going to be absent a lot, my child's going to be late a lot, my child's going to leave a lot. How are we going to handle this? And let's deal with it up front, you know, not at the end of the year. Homework, you know, you've got, you know, X number of hours in the day and Y number of hours of energy. How do we achieve that? Do we say, well, once my child can prove that they've understood the concept, like in math, so they have to do the other 50 problems after they understood it at 10? You know, can you adjust things that way? Can we say, you know, this amount of time is allowed for homework period, because that's all my child can do right now. One of the things that people don't think about a lot, but is emergency evacuation. If a child can't get down the stairs quickly or move quickly, and there is a fire, who's assigned to get that child out of there? And how are we going to do it? Let's plan that up front. And then, since we all know transportation systems run school systems, what are we going to do about it? Because, again, if your child can ride a regular bus, they should ride a regular bus. If you need to adjust to stop, you know, so it's closer, and that should be good too. That's not that big of a whoop, and you know, not a reasonable area to talk about. So, how can we get medical personnel to help? One is get signed permission from everybody, to everybody. So, schools got permission to talk to you. You have, you know, to your doctor. I got permission to talk to the school. And I think one of the things to realize too is that HIPAA, the medical privacy form, says that any health professional can speak to any other health professional on the medical team for that child. So technically, I don't need a HIPAA signed release to speak to your child's gastroenterologist if we're both involved because of the gastritis from the NSAIDs or whatever. School nurse is considered part of the medical team. So school nurse can call me or I can call a school nurse under those privacy laws. So I don't need to sign permission, but it doesn't apply to anybody else in the school. Not aides, principals, anybody else. It's only school nurse. But that's one thing that, again, schools don't always get. And again, part of the thing is, you know, we've got to figure out, you know, who do we blame for your failures? And you always want to, you know, pick someone. But really what we're trying to go for is this, it's helping hands. And so how can we convert some of these situations into more helpful ones? And so it really comes down to how can you minimize the conflict. You got to think about this as a combination of negotiation, brainstorming when you're having these meetings. And you want to try to think about what kinds of measurable outcomes, evidence-based ways of interventions that are going to work. One of the things I've learned over the years that was really helpful was saying, well, let's open my child's file and let's see what worked in the past and what didn't work in the past. As near as I can tell, that's evidence-based. And what can we learn from this? And how can we change it for the future? My third son, to be affectionately called the magic evaporating boy because, you know, no one needs to do the lawn. Where'd you go? Those things just happen all the time. The same thing would happen with this homework and other stuff like that. And so one year you ace math, and the next year you fail it, or almost fail it. The next year, and it wasn't, you know, the subject. It was the teacher and his interactions with the teacher and the teacher's style. And it took a long time for me to figure that out, and an even longer time to convince the school that this was an appropriate way to think about this. And one of the things we never do with our kids, and schools don't do because it's all failure, is you don't think about where you've been successful. You know? So why did Noah pass math this year and not pass math this year? Was it didn't understand it? Or was it this teacher taught in this way and that played to his strengths, and this one taught another way? And really, a lot of times the kids who are having problems like this, they'll say, tell me the teachers that you liked and you've done well with, and how are they different from the ones you didn't? And being nice don't count. You got to think about how the classroom's organized, how, where things are. Do they, how do they adjust things for you, and how can we build on that? And you always want to bring discussion back to your child. Again, my ADHD was such that I'd go off on these little tantrums with folks, and I had to, put a little sign on and say, this is all about meals, stupid. So that when people would say, well, we're going to do X, Y, and Z, and it sort of sounded okay, but I wasn't sure. I'd say, so tell me how this helps Neil. I don't necessarily understand. And so you want to think about how your child's problems are going to affect him or her in school, which laws apply, what's best for the student. You've got to be willing to compromise, because this is going to be compromised. Again, you've got, by definition, people are thinking about programs, people are thinking about one person, and it's got to meet in the middle somewhere. But they got to compromise them too. You got to think broadly and creatively. Again, do the Bobby Kennedy thing. Others ask why, I ask why not. In Virginia, one of the major tenets of Virginia is historical precedent. We've always done things this way, and that's how we're going to continue to do them. And well, that's not so good. This was actually one of the biggest things that was mentioned to me and what I mean by think about the end first is, if you think about school systems and IEPs or 504 plans, they're like phoenixes. They go up in flames in June, and they rise from the ashes in September. And that's what they think about. We're the only ones to think about, where's my child going to be at 22, or 25, or 30? And so you want to think about what kinds of things does my child need to know, what kind of skill sets do they need to have when they get done with this experience. And if they need to be able to do X, Y, and Z, then by what time do they need to do JKL? And by what time do they need to know DEF? And start working backwards, because that's your ultimate goal. And schools are going to think this year, just like out of my house, out of my classroom. You're the only one's going to think long term. And we've got to bring things back into those contexts. So you can reframe the discussions, saying, well, it's really important, yes, that we learn to write really neatly and so on for you, but down the road it's going to be keyboarding. We're wasting our time on this. But he's got this amount of energy and, these kinds of problems. And there's trust your instincts. Our right brains are a hell of a lot smarter than our left. And, if things don't feel right, they ain't right. It's the same, when your kid's not, something's up with your kids. And then it takes you forever to try to figure out what it is. It takes us doctors usually longer than that. But I think the point is that you got to trust your instincts. If it sounds right, then it's probably good. You got to participate as much as possible. Woody Allen's rule of 80% success is a matter of showing up absolutely holds. You can have people participate virtually. I know I'm an outlier in my field, and part of why I do this is my vengeance on my school system for things they've done to me and my kids, and so I'm going to make sure other school systems get paid back by other people doing it better. But I'll participate in meetings by speakerphone, or I've tried Skype, that's been harder to pull off. And I'll tell parents, listen, I'm going to book an appointment, I'm going to charge you for it. Your insurance may or may not pay for this, and I'm sorry, I can't control that. But I'll be there for half hour, an hour, and we participate. And other docs can do it that way. Don't necessarily have to be half hour, it can be 10 minutes or things like that. But having the physician or your physical therapist or the psychologist, whoever, give that information directly to the team in real time and have questions being able to be asked that way makes a heck of a difference. One of the other things that's really weird about this too, having a mail in the room makes a heck of a difference to it. Even if you doesn't say anything, doesn't do anything. It just changed the whole tenor of meetings, and it's beyond me, but that's just one of those other little things. You need to understand everybody else's perspectives, their limitations. You don't want the perfect stand in progress, but you don't want to do anything that doesn't feel right. You know, I mean, how many times have you gone against your gut and it's worked out? Right? Very, very few. So, again, remember, this is a system that was created by lawyers. Lawyers live in an adversarial world, and that is going to be part of this. So there are differences, there are going to be conflicts. You know, you just got to say, I understand that, you know, and you just got to deal with it. You know, after a while, I've gotten used to tweaking and having just fun at these meetings, because otherwise it's crazy. So, you know, I bring all these books in with, you know, Post-it notes stuffed in randomly, and just sit them on the table, you know, and stuff like that. I mean, one year I found out how many people they were going to have at the meeting, and I brought that many plus one from my side of the table, just to fill up the room, and I found that way too. One thing you got to also think about is, you know, is person versus program. Is you may come up with a perfect IEP, and you have a teacher that it just doesn't work with, or your child just doesn't. It's just, you know, it sounded great on paper. It ain't going to work in real life. You know, again, my magic evaporating boy sabotaged some of the best IEPs I have to write. You need to, again, deal with your ideals versus your reality and the abilities of both your child and the school and the teachers and everybody else with what resources you've got. And you got to, again, short-term versus long-term thinking and solutions. Is, you know, we got to get through this month because in the hospital infusions, and, you know, let's take care of this, and then we're going to take care of the, you know, work on the next 2 months after that, and the rest of the year after that, in the context of making sure everything's fine by the time you get out of the school system. And so these differences are real, and you just got to say, you know, they're there, you know, and you know, sometimes you're just not going to agree. But I think what I found is most times you get to some consensus, and you can come up with ways of compromising without compromising yourself, as long as you keep the student's best interest in mind. And that really is the key, is just bringing it back. But again, not expected to listen to or anything else. And, you know, the student was, you know, not the adults. And as I said, it keeps coming, it's all about the student. So we want to go to be in this kind of gridlock. You know, you can decide whether this is a school or you guys or not. To these kinds of, you can have an Irish road like this, or go in Yellowstone, or you can have the Golden Highway, and you have lots of forks that you can go down. And if you decide, if you take a fork and it doesn't work out, then you back up and, you know, hit GPS and get out of it. So I want to thank you for your attention. Not falling asleep or anything like that. This was one of the best Halloween things Neil came up with. I'm going to go through a bunch of other resources and things here, and just to let you know, on this table here I brought in a lot of different books and other things that I'm going to reference in here where I've gotten things for you to look at and browse as well, but you can't take them, sorry, any further detail on that, but at least you can decide which ones you like or not. But some of the resources, Family Voices is a national organization that's about generic health issues for children with disabilities of all sorts. Again, Academy Pediatrics, Medical Home site is put up by the American Academy of Pediatrics as well, and has many, many issues that relate at different levels with kids and families with disabilities, both at home, with doctors, at school, lots of other areas. And the Arthritis Foundation, of course. Bright's Law is one of the best sites out there for any kind of school issue related to this. Pete and Pam Wright. Pete Wright's a special ed lawyer who has dyslexia. There's one of a couple of Supreme Court cases, and he and Pam have written a number of books, and their website is fabulous. And quite frankly, when I'm on a speakerphone conference and people are starting to talk about what is or isn't legit, I've got their website on my computer, so I can check. And one thing is the school says, well, we can't possibly do that because it's against law, or it's not regulations, or it's not policy. You know, paraphrase Tom Cruise and, you know, say, show me the regs, show me the policy. As you know very well, there are no things that happen in any school without a policy or regulation. And if they're going to say, we can't do this because it's not allowed, have them show it to you. You know, that's what some of these books are for. I happen to have the state and federal regs on my computer, and so I said, you get them all, we don't have here. Not a problem. Let me get my computer on. You know, again, if you're going to talk law and you're going to tell me this is against the law, then show it to me. And if you can't, then let's move on. Mothers in Hell is a wonderful website. It started by some mothers in Oregon who, they said that's what they're defined by the Oregon State Board of Education. It's Mothers in Hell too, because those mothers sort of outgrew the school system, and some other mothers from Illinois picked up the wand. These are some other general disability resources. Department of Ed, both, this is the main department, this is the office that's involved in special educational services. Your state is going to have something similar to Virginia's. And one of the things, if you're having conflicts or questions about things, or you've been told something and you're not sure and they can't do it, call up your state department head. Most of them will have an equivalent of an office of dispute resolution, and someone you can call and say, I've been told this. Is that true? Or you can call the feds, you know, get their name and then come back to the meeting and say, no, I talked to so-and-so and this is what they told me. These would also be the people that if you want to file a complaint about your school and how they're doing things. These are the folks you do it to, on either state and or fed. These are a bunch of transition resources that you can go to. Again, some other things about ADA, employment. These are some of the books that I mentioned to you. This book is fabulous, and you can download it so you can keep it on your computer as well as have a hard copy. Two really cool things about it is one is it's got some Marin County, California IEP forms, and they've got more stuff in there to use as templates or ideas about how you're going to look at things than like anything I've ever seen. He also has templates for letters and forms and tracking things and all sorts of other stuff like that you can either try out a book or print as PDFs, including things like letters to ask someone to be excluded from a meeting. I didn't realize I had that book, and stuff like that. So it's very good. This book is just came out as a second edition. It's also fabulous. I mean, so if you're going to pick some, this is where I start. IPEA 2004, No Child Left Behind. These are really more technical things. The Emotions Advocacy, all about IEPs, and some of the other books are much more practical. And these are some other ones that are very good. This book, Teaching Teens, is again very similar to IEP Guide. It's got lots of charts in there about your student is having this problem. These are some solutions, along with templates you can use. And whether your child has ADHD or not, it's just exceptionally good book. And then these are some things to think about when your child gets out. And so with that, I'll stop and say happy trails. As you can tell, I love Halloween. And I'll open up to questions for the rest of the time we have left. Thanks for your attention. Yes, ma'am.
I have several questions. First one is, in the protocol, can you include something about the absences and parties that
Absolutely.
are given? Because I addressed that at Kelly's 504, and they told me that could not be put in a 504.
It's access. It can be defined as that's an impairment in my child's access to the curriculum because she is going to have doctor's appointments and she is going to have therapy appointments. These are medically necessary. And by the way, do you understand about how arthritis works? Well, I understand. It don't matter if you're rural or not. They don't care. I'm not sure they don't care, but they have been challenged. And this is one of these situations, more data is better. You know, walk out with these books and say, well, you know, it says here, or I called the State Department of Ed and this is what they told me. The other thing is, every state has, under the National Developmental Disabilities Act, every state has got one's called Developmental Disabilities Board. There's another one that is what's called a University Affiliated Program, and another one is a Protection and Advocacy. And these are all agencies that every state has. They have under different names, but the Protection and Advocacy organization within your state is there presumably to provide information, support, and advocacy for people who have disabilities. And so, again, they may have limitations by funding or staff or things like that, but they should at least be able to give you the correct legal advice. Or in Virginia, at times, if it's a particularly egregious thing, or if it's a situation that this may serve as a model for lots of other students that can get a decision on this, it's going to violate things. They'll hire lawyers to, you know, or advocates to go with you and to go to meetings. One of the things that's really good is to have somebody other than you at the meeting, because, you know, you don't get between any of us and our children.
Well, that actually happened to me. I requested, it was actually supposed to be a parent-teacher conference, and our teacher was very difficult, and we ended up with her for 2 years because of the looping that they were doing, and she bombarded me all in with nobody, and she sat there with 3 other school people within the school that were, and of course I wasn't very nice, and I don't know that would never happen to me again.
You adjourn the meeting.
I don't know exactly, like, when you request a holiday door, who exactly is supposed to be, I mean, is there certain people that are supposed to be there?
Yeah, you're supposed to, and some of that's federal, that you need to have an administrator, you need to have a regular ed teacher, you need to have a special ed teacher, and then other specialists as necessary. It's very similar to an IEP team. It can be a bit, it's not as well defined for 504s as it is for IEPs. But I think, you know, the other side of the coin is, quite frankly, if you're getting upset, say, we're adjourning the meeting. Okay? You know, you're entitled to do that. I don't sign anything. I never sign anything in meetings because, of course, my boss at home had to review it. And I want to go home and think about it and go through that and, you know, get her input and, you know, let's look at our calendars and have another meeting. And I would have meetings, you know, with Magic Evaporating Boy, I would set up an every 2-week meeting with all of his teachers in high school.
We've never had all failed teachers in our meeting.
Well, but
is it even there? Which this year she changed the school, but
yeah. See, if they're not there, then you walk out.
okay.
You say, I took time off for this, and we all need to do this. Okay. Let me ask her a question. I'll come back to you. Okay.
Okay, so I'm homeschooling now,
Mm-hmm.
and she'll be going to school in the fall. So I'm starting with this.
Yes.
Okay, so I've heard that the IEP and the 504 is reviewed each year. Now, what does that mean? Does that mean if you don't revise anything, you still have the IEP as it was,
Wait.
the 504 as it was, or does that mean it's no longer going and you have to?
No. What it means is you have, once you're found eligible on your initial eligibility, you have that eligibility for 3 years. Okay. The plan you put in place can only go at maximum a year. So you need to sit down and look at it. And if it's working, everything's cool, you say, this is great, let's keep going. You can have an IEP meeting every day of the week if you want. You can call it anytime you want. I don't know why you want to, but, you know, sometimes for entertainment it may be worth doing that. But it can't go longer than a year without being reviewed. Okay? And when I was at Loggerheads with our school about when kids, you know, we made a 6-week IEP. And said we're going to come back and review these things because I don't believe that what you're going to do as intervention is going to work. But I'll take your word for it, but we're going to relook at this in 6 weeks and then we'll talk about it again. and you're going to have objective measures to prove to me that it worked.
So in the 3 years though, you have to really redo the process again?
It's an abbreviated process. Okay, but it has to be looked at, and again, and it's a reasonable point, you had a disability 3 years ago, do you still have that disability? I mean, and that's fair. But if you still do and things haven't changed that much, you don't necessarily need to go through the whole reevaluation. You may need to update your evaluations.
And I was told in our school district in South Carolina that 5 to 4 follows my child.
Yes. Well, it doesn't technically follow you through college, but it allows you to go to disability services offices and justifies that your child received accommodations while they were in school. And IEPs will also hold that way, but that way it's not that you just all of a sudden develop a disability when you got to college. So that's one reason why you can be together. Okay. Let me answer, and then we'll come to you in a second. Okay.